Minutes. The minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, 9th April is to be deferred. Can we have the motion, please?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that those minutes be now deferred.
I second that, sir.
Question is that those minutes be deferred. All members in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Minutes have been deferred.
Announcements by Your Honour the Deputy Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions, papers, government notices.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to give notice of a resolution in the name of the Honourable Minister of Housing, Lands and Rural Development pertaining to the lease of 5,957.1 square meters of Crown land at Government Hill, St. Michael to the Maria Holder Memorial Trust.
Private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Question is that those standing orders so mentioned be suspended for the rest of the day's sitting. All members in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Business. Order number 9, sir. In the name of the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the second reading of the debt holder approval of debt restructuring amendment bill 2019.
Member for Christchurch Central.
Good morning, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise to bring before this honourable chamber the amendments to the debt holder approval of debt restructuring bill 2019. But with your permission, sir, I wish to also propose that order number 2, which relates to the amendment, a resolution to amend the Treasury bill limit, since it's related to the overall debt restructuring, that I propose that we do both items as a cognitive debate.
Do we have a seconder, please? The question is that those two items be done as a cognitive debate, order number 9 and order number 2.
Yes.
All members in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Proceed.
Thank you, sir. Now, sir, when this government took office just under a year ago, 11 months, we would have indicated almost immediately to the country, sir, that at that time, as the Barbados economy had found itself in a real crisis, that the first order of business, sir, was to create a level of stability before the underlying problems, sir, could be addressed effectively. And so much of the work, sir, that this government has focused on over the past 11 months would have been to provide, sir, that measure of stability for Barbadians to be able to go about their business as they seek to move forward, sir, under a new administration. And so, having identified, sir, that the public debt of Barbados was one of the key obstacles, sir, with respect to the government's ability to be able to supply relatively good public goods and services of the standard that the public would expect, sir. given that much of the government's revenue was being expended increasingly, sir, to servicing debt, that we felt, sir, as we still do now, that we needed to address that. And in October of last year, sir, we came to this honorable chamber and we announced officially to the country, sir, what the offer with respect to the domestic portion of our debt would be. And at that time, sir, we would set out a series of new instruments that will effectively, sir, bring about a level of greater certainty with respect to anyone who would hold public debt of Barbados. And so this amendment today, sir, is just to make a few provisions for a few adjustments that we would have made since that initial offer. Because, sir, at the time of the exchange offer with respect to the domestic debt restructuring, the bonds, the newly structured bonds that we would have issued, sir, would have been designed specifically to make sure that, on the one hand, we would move, sir, over the next 15 years, which is to 2033, sir, bring our debt to GDP to 60% from 157% where it was when we took over officially, sir, in May of last year. And all of what we have been able to achieve so far, sir, is to make sure that we put our overall debt trajectory down, sir, back to a level of sustainability such that the taxpayers of this country, sir, the taxpayers of this country, as well as the government, will be able, sir, to manage our affairs in a way, sir, that is consistent with good governance. And so the provisions that we seek to bring today, sir, relate to, first and foremost, to provide for instruments issued to the Central Bank of Barbados. B, to provide for a more equitable treatment for estate and legacy accounts and individuals who hold debt issued by state-owned enterprises. C, sir, to authorize the government of Barbados to prepay all or part of the principal and interest accrued on a specific debt instrument. And D, sir, other related matters. Now, sir, one of the central tenets with respect to the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation, sir, as I said, was in the first instance, sir, to create a measure of stability. Because without stability, sir, all the reforms that we intend to pursue will not take root, sir, unless the economy is in fact, sir, stable. And as you would know, sir, anyone who may watch any of the TV series where medical services are being provided, oftentimes, sir, when you're a surgeon and you are going in to do one specific thing and something happens to the patient that creates a measure of uncertainty, one always has to make sure you address those immediate issues before you can continue with the operation for which you intended to do. The debt, sir, of this country is pretty much one of those areas, sir, where you have to be constantly addressing in order, sir, to keep the economy stable. And therefore, over the course of the next 14 years, as we seek to bring total debt down to 60% of GDP, sir, it is the maintenance, sir, of that stability which is required to be able to ensure that the overall reforms that we intend to take under the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation, that those reforms can in fact be delivered. And the Prime Minister, sir, in her budget speech just a few weeks ago indicated to the country that the primary message, sir, is to stay the course. Stay the course. And staying the course means, sir, that you can't take your eye off the mission because there's still a lot of work to be done. And the work, certainly, that we have been able to achieve, sir, and conduct over the past 11 months was essentially, sir, to stabilize and give certainty, relative certainty, sir, with respect to Barbadians being able to carry out their business in the economy. One of the key things, sir, with respect to the provisions that are before the House today relates to the fact, sir, that after the exchange offer in October of last year, the Ministry of Finance and the government, sir, undertook to, in a sense, sir, prepare. Specifically, sir, pensioners. As you are aware, sir, that in November of last year, we would have given a cash payment of up to $20,000 to pensioners, those persons 60 and above. In effect, sir, altering what the terms and conditions in terms of what we would have issued in October. And then we subsequently, sir, at the end of March of this year, then made an additional payment of up to $30,000, sir, such that anybody who would have held any government debt, sir, up to $50,000 would have been liquidated in cash, sir, up until the end of March of this year. Part of the reason that we felt that that was important, sir, was on the one hand, given that the terms and conditions were changed with respect to pensioners, obviously persons who would have worked, sir, and contributed to the development of this country, that the government felt, sir, it was important to make sure that those persons who are no longer working, who rely pretty much on a fixed income, sir, that we could advance to those Barbadians, those pensioners, monies in cash up front, sir, to make sure that they wouldn't be disadvantaged by the overall impact of the debt restructuring. And so to the extent, sir, that our debt service was too high, the interest rate, sir, being charged because of the multiple downgrades that would have occurred under the previous administration. The cost of servicing that debt, sir, was unsustainable. But as we resort to restructure the debt, sir, we were very conscious that persons living on a fixed income, as our pensioners are, that these provisions that we are asking the House, sir, to pretty much put on a legal footing with respect to the prepayment clause, that we felt, sir, that that was important to make sure that those persons, those pensioners on a fixed income will get as much relief as the government can afford to give them with respect to their holdings of government paper. Now, sir, to the extent that we've been able to do that, and as I said, sir, we've been able to put some up to $50,000, depending on the value of securities that pensioners would have been holding up until just prior to the debt exchange offer last year, that over the course, sir, of the next 42 months, those persons, and starting certainly from today, yes, today's the end of April. From today, precisely, over the next 42 months, sir, pensioners, as well as other bondholders specifically, will be receiving, and I want to focus and zero in on the pensioners. For those pensioners, sir, who hold up to an additional $200,000 with respect to government paper, will from today, sir, receive monthly payments over the next 42 months to allow for that debt, sir, that the government of Barbados owe to be paid down. And all of this, sir, as we seek to put cash back into the economy, sir, will give those pensioners greater certainty with respect to them being able to manage their affairs. Now, sir, this is important, and it's very different from certainly what obtained before, because under the previous system, sir, interest usually would have been paid semi-annually, and so a person would have to wait, sir, every 6 months or so to be able to get some interest. If they held Treasury bills, sir, Treasury bills typically would mature every 90 days or 180 days, depending on which version of the Treasury bills they would hold. But what we are saying, sir, is that the government of Barbados, every month, for the next 42 months, for any pensioner, sir, who holds more than $50,000 in debt, will effectively, sir, receive a monthly payment for the next 42 months, which will seek to liquidate, sir, any additional holdings of debt that the pensioners would have. And so therefore, the prepayment clause that's in here, sir, is just on the one hand to put on a legal footing, sir, and to validate those monies, sir, that we would have already paid out under the debt restructuring. But certainly, sir, what it does now is that as the government seeks to, under the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, that the notion of prepaying now must become, where possible, in the minds of bondholders, that the government is committed, sir, to reducing as quickly as possible. We've mapped out 2033 as the point at which we are able to bring overall debt, both domestic and external, to 60% of GDP. And so therefore, sir, the government is in the business, sir, certainly, sir, over the next 4 years of ensuring that we can prepay as much debt as we can to put the economy as well as the overall macroeconomic picture on a much sounder footing. And so therefore, the notion of prepayment, sir, I think will become a new feature, certainly, for the foreseeable future, because the government of Barbados is committed, sir, to restoring macroeconomic stability, but also debt sustainability, such that whether you're an individual in Barbados, whether you own a business or you're maybe classified as an investor, that the confidence that you can have, sir, in the management of the public finances will be such that the management of the public finances, sir, will be a critical signal with respect to providing confidence across those 3 areas as far as the economy is concerned. And this is important, sir, because whilst this is focused on today looking at the prepayment clauses with respect to pensioners, as we have done, the reality is, sir, is that for a number of goods and services that were supplied to the government, that arrears were built up, sir. As you are aware, a lot of those suppliers will too also, from today, on a monthly basis, also start to be paid. Because the management, sir, and the management of this process, and I must admit, sir, that as we have tried to ensure that there's a measure of openness on the one hand, but accuracy, sir, that certainly the government, through the Ministry of Finance, the BRA, the Treasury, sir, working with the state-owned enterprises has been a task, simply from the point of view, sir, that the data that we've been able to work with, sir, we've had quite a challenge in terms of making sure that what people say they were owed are actually the amounts. And to the extent, sir, that we bring some order with respect to the settlement of domestic arrears, that throughout this process, sir, the payment of these arrears, and we've rolled them into, in part, the debt structure that was issued in October, that the prepayment of these arrears, sir, will see the overall debt stock of the country come down, such that we will be well on our way, sir, to being able to reduce our debt to GDP over the next 14 years to 60%. And, sir, but more importantly, these commitments, sir, I believe, sir, will provide greater levels of stability, such that the other reforms that we intend to take, sir, with respect to the state-owned enterprises as well as the broader economy, can be done simply because, sir, the government is living up to its obligations, and that person, sir, will be able to plan their affairs accordingly. Now, I wish to remind the House, through you, sir, and certainly the public, that one of the salient features of the new bonds relate to the natural disaster clause. And as you would have read in today's paper, certainly the Prime Minister has indicated that we must be hurricane ready. And one of the clauses, sir, that is important with respect to being able to maintain the overall debt sustainability of the country is the provision of that natural disaster clause, which will effectively, sir, suspend in the event that there is a significant climatic event in Barbados, that the suspension of debt payments for 2 years, and using those payments, obviously, for government to have access to in order to help rebuild the country is an important feature, simply because a country, as we recognize, sir, as happened in St. Kitts and other places, that particular innovation allows for the country not to necessarily increase its debt whilst it's trying to respond to a climatic event. And I just want to remind the public, sir, that as we approach the hurricane season, that this is one of the key features of the new debt that we've issued. And so therefore, to the extent, and certainly, sir, we would hope that the country is as prepared as it can be in advance of any climatic event. But the reality is, sir, that what happened in Dominica just a couple of years ago, sir, and certainly in St. Kitts and Grenada in the earlier part of the 21st century, sir, are key markers in terms of a government's ability to respond when it needs to respond. And whilst we do not in any way, sir, want to be impacted by any significant climatic event, it's the government's responsibility to make sure, sir, that it puts the important measures in place to make sure that it can mitigate and respond to these things should they occur. Now, sir, what we've also done with respect to this bill as well is to, as I said, make provision for the issuing of new instruments to the Central Bank of Barbados. Now, sir, as you are well aware, and there's certainly much debate that can be had on this. The Central Bank, sir, as a former central banker myself, plays a critical role in the management of an economy. However, under a previous dispensation, sir, the Central Bank pretty much found itself aiding and abetting, sir, the previous administration in creating a situation where not only the fiscal stability of this country was in question, the overall macro stability of this country was in question, the exchange rate, sir, was in question, the Central Bank in of itself, sir, its own credibility, sir, was in question. And the reality is, sir, that as a former central banker, I must say that central bankers regard their independence and they guard it very, very fiercely. But the reality is, sir, that since we came to office, we have had to legislatively make some amendments before this very chamber with respect to what the central bank can purchase by way of primary securities. And because we, sir, believe that, quite frankly, where there's need for adjustments, that they ought to come to this chamber in the full glare of the public, sir, because we are not saying that there wouldn't be some opportunity in the future, that some challenge that the government and the country may have to respond to that may require a type of intervention. But the reality, sir, is that it cannot happen in the middle of the night and suspecting taxpayers and suspecting pensioners continuing to reinvest in government paper and not being given, sir, the kind of information that they should have with respect to making decisions on their investments. And, sir, we feel that this is quite important because the provision of information, sir, to the public has to be paramount, because if people are going to make decisions about their monies and where to put their money, sir, then they must have confidence in the institutions that are charged with overseeing the affairs of the country. And the Central Bank, sir, is one of those said institutions with which to be that the public, sir, must have absolute trust in. Now, sir, having said that, as you are well aware, and should I remind you that At the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, sir, the Central Bank of Barbados did not hold any treasury bills on its books with respect, obviously, to the government of Barbados. But by the time we took office, sir, the Central Bank had almost $2 billion in treasury bills on its books, helping to finance, sir, government's expenditure, and in effect, sir, taking the country, in a sense, in a direction which the mandate of the central bank, sir, the mandate of the central bank, which with respect to the maintenance of the exchange rate and keeping it stable, sir, is very contrary to that. And so, therefore, the central bank was involved in an operation within the open market space that was counterintuitive, sir, to its mandate of maintaining the fixed exchange rate stability at $2 to $1 US dollar. And so, having taken office, sir, we have sought to put some measures in place to, in a sense, provide parliamentary oversight over the operations of the central bank by insisting, sir, that any purchase of primary securities should be limited to just 10% of government's expenditure. And, sir, if there's to be any deviation from that, then it means that the Ministry of Finance and the Minister responsible for Finance will have to come to this House and say to the country why you're making any adjustments to that expenditure, such that the country, sir, whether you're an investor, whether you're a business owner, whether you're an individual, whether you're a pensioner, or just someone who's working and seeking to purchase government paper as part of your portfolio planning, that information, sir, reaches the public, and that the public will be well aware through the provision of information that they then can make a choice with respect to whether they continue to invest or not. And this is important, sir, because the provision of accurate and timely information to the public is critical, sir, critical to allow persons to plan their affairs. Because, sir, we should always be in a position to give the public as much forward planning and forward certainty, such that people can go about their affairs over the course of a 2, 3, 4-year cycle, knowing that this is the lay of the land, and that you're not going to be going along very merrily and then abruptly, as we've had to certainly do with respect to pulling up the handbrake with respect to the policies that were implemented prior to us taking office last year, that people continued to do things in spite, and, well, people continue to invest in government paper simply because they were not given the information, properly so, by the appropriate authorities, which is the government itself, the central bank, on the other hand, to be able to allow persons to make those decisions. Because with the best will in the world, sir, I feel very strongly that once you are given the information that is very pertinent to you, and you perceive that the risk is palatable to you, then you understand, sir, what those risks are, and you go ahead. If the risk is not part of your appetite, then you withdraw. And I believe, sir, that that is the basis on which any government, sir, must seek to operate going forward. And so to the extent that we have brought these amendments here this morning, in a sense, sir, is this government's commitment to making sure that we bring accurate, relevant, and up-to-date information with respect to allowing the public to be able to make decisions. Now, sir, under the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan, the government isn't going to be issuing any new debt in the next 3 to 4 years, because we are bringing our debt down in line with the overarching strategy, which is to reach 60% of GDP by 2033. And part of the reason for that, sir, is that as we seek to settle, sir, much of the arrears with respect to not just goods and services, settle, sir, much of the tax refunds that certainly, sir, everybody, no matter where you go in this country, sir, people want to know what's happening with the 2011 to 2016 tax arrears. Now, the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, sir, indicated in the budget when those tax arrears will be settled. And part of the reason that we paid, and I on this point, sir, because having paid 2017 first when we came into office, as we felt it was important, sir, for certainty and to have normal service resume, was for the persons that filed in 2018, sir, for 2017, that the establishment of that order, that you would be paid the refunds in the same year that you filed, sir, is an important signal to people that business is resuming or normal service would be resuming. But what that did, sir, on the one hand, was to create a little bit of a gap, because people perceived that if you were only paying 2017, that somehow you wasn't going to be paying the old arrears. And even though we said that we were going to be settling that, obviously it's only when people actually receive those monies in their hands will they believe you. And the truth is, sir, the last administration did this country, sir, a disservice, because the one thing that a government, sir, must keep faith with is with the people. And when persons pay taxes, when persons supply government with goods and services, they expect to be paid. And if there's a tax refund, it should be paid. If it's supplies of goods and services, sir, they should be paid simply because they did so in good faith with what they presume is a responsible government, and responsible governments will seek to settle its obligations. And so these are things, sir, that we believe these prepayments, if you like, the payments will continue to demonstrate the stability, sir. Stability that we've sought to achieve over the last 11 months, that will continue, that people will be able to plan, sir. Businesses will be able to plan their affairs with respect to the settlement of the outstanding arrears. Individuals who hold government paper will be receiving those payments over the next 3.5 years, those 42 months, sir. And with that, sir, I fundamentally believe, and certainly the government believes, sir, that it is that restoration of order, the restoration of normal service, sir, that will keep the economic stability going, such that the other reforms that needs to be done, the core operations, sir, with respect to the reforms within some of the state-owned enterprises, some of the reforms within government, central government itself, sir, that with those reforms, guided by the economic stability that we have sought to create, sir, would allow Barbados then to come out of this Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan, sir, far better than we found it just 11 months ago. Now, sir, so let me get back to the central bank, because the central bank is critical to the maintenance of order and stability. And as I was growing up, sir, as I said in the previous debate, central banks communicate with the public, and certainly in the past, sir, the public would have regarded the central bank through its governor, communicating with the public, sir, a confidence. But that confidence was built on perhaps the idea that the bank was looking out for them. And I think, sir, that as we seek to redo or implement these reforms, part of the central bank's job, sir, is to make sure that it does its own work to rebuild trust with the public. Now, having said that, we have, throughout this debt restructuring, we would have written off, sir, the $2 billion in treasury bills that would have been on the books, sir, of the central bank last October. But the reality, sir, the central bank, like any other institution, requires certainty in order to be able to manage its own affairs. And so to the extent that the provisions within these amendments for the central bank to itself be financially stable, such that it can oversee the critical regulations of the financial institutions in this country, that they must do so, sir, on a firm financial footing. And so therefore we've created, sir, we've created a series of pretty much T-bills that the central bank will be reserved specifically for the central bank to be able to finance itself, such that they can go about the important work, sir, of making sure that, one, their financing, in a sense, is independent of government. There's going to be a wider debate coming later, sir, with respect to the independence of the central bank, and to the extent that their independence, sir, is driven by the fact that if you want independence, then you can't be coming to government for money. And therefore, it means you got to run your affairs in a way that you don't come to the government or the taxpayers for money when you find yourself in trouble. And notwithstanding the fact that the central bank in of itself is part of the governance, the overall governance of the country, there's a cost to independence. And the reality is that the financing of the bank and the operations of the bank, sir, must be done in a manner that does not require it in the future to come to the government or to any government for financing. And so therefore, the central bank, as you would have been aware, sir, would have experienced some losses in the last few years, which is mind-boggling, because central banks typically, sir, do not incur losses. But that's a subject for a different debate. But the reality is, sir, that under the previous administration, they allowed that to happen. And in a real sense, sir, what we are seeking to do here is, on the one hand, create a level of stability within that institution that, whilst it is critical, but going forward, the management, sir, certainly within that space, will have to be enhanced such that they don't find themselves in the future in a position that they found themselves in over the last couple of years. And so the structure of the Series H, which is being introduced with respect to the Central Bank of Barbados, for which it will be eligible, is designed, sir, to make sure that the central bank receives a stream of income such that they too can be financially independent with respect to not having to come to the government of Barbados for a subvention, as will be the case in order to recapitalize the bank from the losses that they would have incurred under the debt restructuring. Now, sir, these amendments as well, and I wish to say a few things on, whilst we are focused here on the domestic side, I just want to focus on a couple elements indirectly, sir, on the external side, because there's been much noise within the public arena with respect to the status of the external debt negotiations. Now, sir, and it's interesting because, as I said during the original debate on this bill in October, now we signed, sir, a non-disclosure agreement with the committee of persons that we are in negotiations with that hold our external debt. And obviously, as we are negotiating to come to a solution, it wouldn't be right for me to come to say to the public until we have reached some consensus and we are close. It wouldn't be right for us to be able to discuss these things out of turn. But I wish to remind the public that, having seen a couple of articles appear in the public domain that whilst we have always been committed to good faith negotiations with all of our creditors, we have always held the view that as part of this reorganization of Barbados' economy, and the Prime Minister says as well, the burden must be shared fairly. And in order to share the burden fairly, sir, it means that as we look at different elements, different economic agents, sir, and in a sense, the propensity to bear the load, sir, we have sought to make sure that we bring a level of fairness to this process. But, sir, I would remind the House through you, sir, that it is as if we are working. There are some amongst us who are working, and I say some amongst us, as in the country, sir, who are working to try to give a better deal, so to speak, sir, to external creditors than to domestic creditors. And having just had a long conversation about the central bank, sir, and how it got into that, and how it got the country into this position, it is almost, I wish to remind the public that when people come and make pronouncements to them about the status of external credit, I just want people to be reminded that as we, the government right now, we have settled the domestic part of the debt. We are working to settle the external part of the debt. And as we've said from the very beginning, sir, in all this process with respect to burden sharing, that the equity with respect to who and how much, sir, is borne by various players, that we feel is important, sir, that as part of this process, that everybody shares the burden fairly. But there are some amongst us, sir, who are seeking to make sure that somehow or the other, that others fare much better than the very pensioners who are here this morning, sir, to make provisions for the prepayments that we've already made, but to get a better deal for others than would have been meted out, certainly, sir, with respect to those holding the domestic debt. And that is unfortunate, sir. It is unfortunate. And to the extent even, sir, that there are others who are suggesting that our debt has increased, when in fact, sir, since coming to office, we have reduced our debt. It appears that persons don't take account of the fact that we have prepaid, we have restructured the domestic part of the debt. We are in fact, sir, relatively close to settling the external part of the debt, which will be restructured and in effect, sir, bring our debt to GDP down even further. But I just wish to remind the public, sir, that we must stay the course, because in order to unravel that which we inherited, sir, requires us not to be complacent in any way. And I wish, sir, to remind the public that if you imagine, sir, there's a difference between going to the sea at low tide and going at high tide. And I grew up with my grandmother, sir, and the sea ain't got no back door. It was my grandmother's mantra. And in our minds, sir, there was always that difference between low tide and high tide. Now, sir, we inherited this government not in high tide, sir. A tsunami was rushing in. And nobody goes to the beach, sir, when there's a tsunami. We can all go to the beach at high tide, but we cannot go to the beach, sir, when there's a tsunami. And we inherited a government where not just the beach, sir, but everything in Barbados was under a wave, sir. A tsunami. A tsunami of debt, a tsunami of arrears, a complete mess, sir. And when you look at the photographs of any place that's been hit by a tsunami, sir. In the aftermath of it, everything, sir, everything is upended. And we inherited a government, sir, and we've sought over the last 6 months to put this country back together. And as we go forward, sir, in creating a level of confidence, a level of stability, Barbadians, the decisions that we've had to take, sir, weren't decisions that we would take if we were just inheriting the government where it was high tide. It's a tsunami, sir. The place was confused. And in trying to unravel that confusion, sir, put things back in place as they were, we have had to do some serious, serious work across the length and breadth of this government. We are not ashamed that we've had to do this work, sir, because we understood what was required from the beginning to get a level of stability back to this place. And, sir, we are by no means out of the woods, as the Prime Minister would say. No means at all. And the more that we focus on maintaining the stability, sir, and allowing the other reforms to take root, sir, I wish to remind the public through you, sir, that this journey, sir, has only just begun. And whilst we may feel a little confident, a lot more confident than we did before, we cannot, sir, take our eyes off of the mission, because we cannot relax, sir, by any stretch of the imagination, because the tsunami, sir, or the impact of the tsunami is still there. And this government, in 11 short months, have sought to bring a level of stability and confidence back to Barbadians that, you know what, sir, we can clean up this tsunami. And we seek to do so, sir, across the government, in every ministry, in every department, engaging the various stakeholders, sir, simply because we are Barbadians, sir, we are accustomed to leading, and we found ourselves in a situation that we would not like to find ourselves in. But, sir, we will re-engineer this recovery to make sure that what took place, sir, in the last 10 years, and people must be committed to ensuring that they will not allow what happened in the last 10 years, sir, ever to happen again in this country. And it means, sir, that institutions who insist on independence or who wish to be independent, sir, must manage themselves, sir, in the interests of the country. And as I said, with respect to the central bank and its independence, there's going to be some legislation that will come later this year that will speak to that. But the reality is, sir, that institutions in this country must understand their role in maintaining, sir, stability. Because stability is that asset, sir, that Barbados has always treasured, whether it is political stability, whether it is economic stability, whether it is monetary stability in terms of the exchange rate, sir. Stability is the asset, sir, that this country must always make sure that it protects. And institutions must make sure that they understand their role in maintaining that stability and not act in a manner that is contrary to that. Now, sir, as I spoke and asked for your permission earlier with respect to the resolution, order number 2, which, as I said in October, sir, when I came here, that we would have increased the local loans limit by $3 billion as we were restructuring the debt to take that Treasury bill stock, as well as the stock of the other arrears and what have you, with respect to rolling those into the debt restructuring on the domestic side. I had indicated to the House then that as we were increasing by $3 billion the local loans limit, that we would come back at the appropriate time in the future to lower the Treasury bill limit, which currently is $4.5 billion by the commensurate amount. And The resolution that's before the House as part of order number 2 speaks to the setting of that limit, simply because, sir, if government or any government intends, sir, to increase its debt, it must send signals to the market that it is going to do so. And it cannot happen. That's part of the reason why a government cannot introduce a tax and nobody knows about it. It must come to this place, sir, and say what the tax is, what is the rate, and all of those details must be provided to the public, because you can't get up tomorrow morning and go and collect a tax somewhere. And the same way that that is important, sir, it is important that the signal is sent clearly whenever a government wants to increase its debt limit, to be able to signal to the various market participants, if you like, the government's appetite for increasing debt. And so therefore, in bringing the balance, sir, back to the overall debt stock, whether the holding of long-term securities or short-term securities as it relates to Treasury bills, then that's the essence really of order number 2, which speaks to bringing the overall balance in terms of the overall debt limit back to where it should be. But certainly, sir, over the course of the next, as I said, 14 years, the government and the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, the anchor, sir, of the program is really to make sure that we hit that 60% of GDP by 2033. Other members will speak to the growth areas that will allow us to be able to achieve that. But the reality is, sir, that whilst we are focused on managing the public finances, growth obviously is critical to that equation. And so therefore we are putting the appropriate measures in place for growth to happen. Now, I cannot think, sir, of any other measure than confidence, which is critical for growth. And one of the critical elements for confidence is pretty much trust in government, that it will pay its bills on time, and communicate certainly with the various stakeholders, sir, that if there's a deviation from the modus operandi, that is communicated, and then obviously where any adjustments need to be made, that they are made. Because, sir, the maintenance of the trust and the confidence is critical, sir, to growth, such that persons can plan out their affairs with respect to being able to achieve any growth measures. And so whilst we are focused very clearly, sir, on creating that environment of relative certainty with respect to public policy and the management of public finances over the next 3 to 4 years, and it is a tough ask simply because, sir, the tsunami that we inherited, the impact, sir, and the impact is still being felt by the ordinary Barbadian. And in correcting not correcting, sir, in cleaning up, cleaning up of the mess, it means, sir, that tough decisions have had to be made in order to create stability. The creation of the stability, sir, with respect to not just dealing with the debt, now allows us, sir, within this next phase to focus very clearly on those reforms that we all know that might have contributed to the debt situation, that we make sure that we put things in place to make sure that they don't happen again. And so we, sir, are very mindful, very, very, very mindful that there's a lot of work left to be done. And whereas to the ordinary Barbadian for whom this debate does not directly impact, because I know that the pensioners who would have received their monies in advance, sir, they understand what has happened in the past 6 months with respect to the debt restructuring. They understand what the government has been able to do with respect to the prepayments of, up until now, up to $50,000, depending on how much securities, long-term securities under the previous debt structure that pensioners held, they understand what we are doing because they've received, sir, monies in their hands with respect to the debt restructuring. But to the ordinary Barbadian, sir, who is a taxpayer, the reality is this, sir. Whenever a government seeks to increase its debt limit, and this is where the signals are important, and I want to make it abundantly clear because when the previous Minister of Finance came to this house, sir, and increased the debt limit, people didn't make the connection. But in economics, sir, whenever you see an increase in debt, in terms of the indication from the government with respect to the debt limit, that is almost always, sir, accompanied by the increase in taxation. It may not happen in the same time period, but whatever happens, to achieve balance, sir, taxpayers will either pay more now or more later. But with the previous government, almost with regularity, they will come and increase the debt limit. And in increasing the debt limit, they then sought to increase the taxes simply because they weren't getting any growth in the economy. They never focused on proper financial management. And so to the extent, sir, that some of the strange arrangements that took place within some of the state-owned enterprises that they did obviously meant that resources were diverted from areas where they should have been spent. And so it was, and I wish to indicate to the public quite clearly that I do not recall anywhere in the Caribbean where there's been an increase, a substantive increase in debt, almost $9 billion in a decade, but yet the public services, no buses, as the member for Christchurch West can attest, no garbage trucks, as the member for St. Michael East can attest. Member for Christchurch East will indicate that much of the Mains Lane program that we had indicated needed to be done 10 years ago, sir, much of that work is still to be done. All of that work, as he said, is still to be done. But yet, sir, in a decade, having left office where the debt was about $6.5 billion, under previous government, they increased the debt by $9 billion almost. But yet, sir, some of the very services that the public should expect to accompany, because if you're going to raise taxes, sir, they're going to be delivering something. And to the extent, sir, that this government, under this tsunami, sir, have sought, and it's not been easy by any stretch of imagination, because to bring back some order, sir, to what I could only describe, and well, don't let me say that, it may be unparliamentary. What I can only describe, sir, as incompetent and caring, that having increased the national debt by such an amount, sir, we should not be having a discussion today, sir, about the number of transport work buses that they have. There should have been a full fleet. Our constituents, sir, should not be complaining about the collection of garbage, sir. Should never be. And to the extent, sir, that we are in the process of resolving those said problems in the context of trying to bring a level of stability back to the overall economy, sir, I want persons to appreciate that much of the pain that is perceived, and I know that it is real, sir, it is real, but the pain, sir, the real pain, the real pain is that the previous administration, sir, had the resources to resolve many of the problems that Barbadians now today are feeling the impact of the neglect, sir. But those resources, sir, went places that they should not. And that's the stark reality of where we are with respect to this debt problem. And so as we seek, sir, to bring some order back to the public finances, some order, sir, back to how does a government not pay suppliers for goods and services rendered, sir? How? Barbadian suppliers, sir. I know we have people, sir, who are working to get a better deal for persons who don't live about here, sir. Yes, we need investment, but we have committed, sir, ourselves to making sure that the burden can be shared fairly. And in so doing, this government, sir, will continue to make sure that we create that balance, simply because we understand, sir, that all that is required is people to have confidence that his government is going to, in a sense, having created the rules, sir, that you play by the rules and give people the certainty that they need to be able to go about their business. And so these amendments before the Honorable Chamber this morning, and I just wish to, for the record, with respect to the prepayment clause and at clause 3 of the bill, sir, it says the government may, with not less than 15 days prior notice, written notice, to the instrument holder, prepay A, part of, or B, all of, the principal and accrued but unpaid interest up to that date of such prepayment on a specified debt instrument. And so, sir, this is critical because we announced in November what we would have done with respect to the prepayment clauses with respect to pensioners. Those pensioners have, in fact, sir, already, some of the pensioners have already, in a sense, been liquidated of their holdings of government paper. For those who would have held less than $50,000 in government securities, they've already been paid their monies. We are committed, sir, over the next 3.5 years to dealing with those pensioners who hold up to an additional $200,000 that they will be paid in equal monthly installments, sir, over the next 42 months. By the same token, sir, for those suppliers who the government of Barbados would have owed arrears for goods and services rendered under the previous administration, similarly, sir, we are going to be paying those from today, sir, monies every month to be able to settle those arrears. And, sir, this has not been an easy road, as persons would have heard over the weekend, because having come to government, sir, and making much of the decisions that we've had to make, sir, this is the reason, sir, that we were elected. We were elected to govern, and govern we shall. And whilst our commitment, sir, is to the people of Barbados, we wish to remind the people of Barbados, sir, that staying the course and seeing this mission through to the end, sir, seeing this mission through to the end is what will bring back, sir, the pride and industry to this fair land. Now, sir, there's much more that can be said with respect to this debt restructuring. At the appropriate time, as I've said in the past, we will come to this chamber. We will provide the appropriate information to the public through yourself, sir, with respect to how this government, one, the decisions that we've made that we can't necessarily communicate in advance, but once decisions have been made, sir, we will certainly give to the public the assurance that we will then provide the appropriate information with respect to the decisions that have been made. But, sir, much has been said, certainly, about fees and all kinds of stuff as it relates to this business. But at a later date, sir, we will be in a position to address that as well. But the reality is this, sir. We are in the process of reforming and re-engineering everything that we do in Barbados. The settlement of our debt, sir, is the central component, sir, of us being able to respond to the public by the way that the government manages its finances, and the quick resolution, sir, of these debt issues provides certainty for government to be able to then focus on some of the other areas. And so, whilst this is critical, we have already started some of the other work. But in very short order, sir, we intend to bring, as I mentioned earlier, a resolution to the external side of the debt, and more information will be provided on that in terms of the potential resolution on that, in much the same way as we've done with the domestic debt. And so, for persons who've just awoken to find out that we said that we were almost a year ago, we certainly said on June 1st why we were suspending external debt payments, because it was part of the mission, sir, to create stability. Because had we, in June, sir, paid the debt service, the external debt service as due, our ability, sir, in the context of what took place certainly in that summer in trying to get the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program in place, sir, had we continued to service external debt, that potentially, sir, would have compromised the country's ability to maintain the fixed exchange rate. And all Barbadians, sir, all Barbadians bar none, do not want to contemplate ever the notion of a devaluation. And knowing that, sir, we took that decision, fully cognizant, sir, of the impact that it would have, certainly with respect to the debt restructuring. But as I said, sir, all of that was part of the decision-making to create a level of stability. And stability comes, sir, clearly at a cost. And so therefore, in containing those costs, we have sought to, on the one hand, stop the central bank from continuing the actions which is counterintuitive to that very mandate, sir, to create the stability that we would like as far as the country is concerned. We suspended those external debt payments in that context, sir, given that I don't think any government has ever inherited a relative low level of foreign reserves from another. The management, sir, of the public finances was at its worst, sir, with respect to the ways and means that we would have inherited even a few weeks into the fiscal year. The place, sir, was a complete mess. And where we are today, while, sir, we are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination, this country, sir, can feel proud that it has a government that gets up every day, sir, goes to work, committed to the mission, sir. And all I'm asking of the country, sir, is that, as the Prime Minister said, you stay the course, complete the mission, and this country, sir, will be able to see a much brighter future. And with those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Obliged.
I'd like to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you. Second. Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise this morning to lend my voice and my support to this bill that is before this House. I noted in the introductory remarks of the member for Christchurch East Central, the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance, that he seemed to be sending me a couple signals about what should perhaps form a part of my intervention as I followed him this morning. He made reference to the fact, sir, that these amendments, as part of this overall bill, allow us to do a few things. And I want to reference two very important features. One, as the honourable member mentioned in his opening, has to do with the very important anchor for the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan. Now, sir, we are grappling with a reality here, and I want to be very forthright in saying that I am sure that the members in this chamber are receiving the feedback and the reflection from some Barbadians that we want to be able to get on with it. And certainly what we are doing is getting on with it. But there is a notion that and I wouldn't say what was allowed to happen, but what was done quite willfully by the last administration over the last 10 years, we should seek to sweep under the carpet and put to rest. And there is a part of that, sir, that I understand. I understand that certainly collectively, Barbadians must be dealing with a certain kind of post-traumatic stress that has come from having the last administration attempt to manage its affairs. So I understand that we would want to very quickly try and forget that which was wrought upon the people of this country by the last administration. But I want to make something very clear, sir. It is not just a platitude to say that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. That is not just something that is said. That is something that holds a lot of truth. As early as June 2018, sir, much of what the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment brought to this chamber in the way of reforms, the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central mentioned some of those measures that seek to govern how the central bank acts, issues related to the Ways and Means account, things that had to do with making sure that a lot of what was done under the cover of darkness over the previous 10 years would not be allowed to happen again. I always say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, that we have to govern not necessarily for ourselves now and what we know we will do, but we have to govern for the worst compulsions of mankind. And certainly we have to govern almost retroactively for what the last administration was allowed to do. This is not, sir, about blame because you have no ideas or no policy, because clearly we do and we have been implementing. But this is about pointing out, sir, that the things that happened over the previous decade, we under no circumstances must allow to happen again. And so I want to say quite clearly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, that even while we outline our plans for growth, for investment, for economic enfranchisement for Barbadians, even while we paint a picture of the future and provide the roadmap for how we are going to bring Barbadians along, every one of them, in order to get there, we have to make reference to the things, not just that brought us here, We have to make reference to the kind of governance in which we will never engage again. Let's not confuse it with not having policy. This Barbados Labour Party administration has policy, has ideas, and is implementing. Those policies and ideas and that action is what allowed us to reduce the debt to GDP ratio already to 125% from over 170% where we found it. That is what allowed us to increase the reserves from 400 million, barely 4.5 weeks of import cover, to over 1.1 billion, where it is today. Those ideas and policies and implementation, that is what got us there. But this notion that we are never to make reference to the lost decade, to the things that we want to keep in the back of our minds because we want to make sure that on behalf of the people of this country who gave us this clear mandate, no administration should ever be able to take us back there. And that is why, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, we make reference to the last 10 years. It's not about blame. It is about making sure that we have reference to history so that we do not allow it to be repeated. Because, sir, there are those who, after having not been able to get themselves together to be able to implement a single coherent policy in 10 years, would want to make us believe that they're managing to regroup in just under 1 year. A group of people who could not come together to find a single plan as a government for 10 whole years. We have on the one hand, sir, she who would be queen, all of a sudden finding a voice to hold forth on economic policy. And then he who would be king, I hope the two of them don't trip over one another, offering apology on behalf of, well, I'm not sure who. So it is important for us not to forget where that group of people has taken us, because it would seem that they themselves are not sufficiently penitent, are not sufficiently reflective of what they have done to this country, such that they think Barbadians have forgotten in just under a year. And on the other hand, as the honourable member who introduced this bill mentioned, sir, we have those who were also complicit, now acting in their role as advisor to the external entities in which this government and this Ministry of Finance are in negotiation, now acting as if everything is a surprise. While this Barbados Labour Party government had to come and put things in place to allow and to hold the Central Bank of Barbados to a certain kind of behavior that did not in the past obtain, we had a central bank that acted well outside the bounds of financial discretion and financial responsibility. Now all of a sudden acting the former leader of that institution, as if, well, everything that is happening in this country with respect to its fiscal position is a surprise. How could it be a surprise? All of a sudden holding forth on what is going to drive investment and on what is going to drive growth, as if those things were not equally true years ago when that individual was purported to be advising the then Minister of Finance. So, sir, I too am looking forward. We have a responsibility to look forward and to take the people of Barbados forward. But let us put things in perspective. And let us understand that those who have all of a sudden found a voice could not speak up in the name of the people of Barbados when their livelihoods, when their futures were being frittered away by an irresponsible government. Sir, in my brief remarks this morning, I want to highlight a few parts of these amendments, the amendments to this bill, that I think are important, that I think are visionary, and that I think provide us with a platform for the kind of growth and prosperity that the people of this country deserve. The honourable member who introduced the bill, the member for Christchurch East Central, highlighted the importance of the prepayment clause. And I want us to understand where we have come in 11 short months. We have a government that is talking about prepayment, where we had a previous administration that could not even talk about payment, that had so mismanaged the country's resources, that it had thrown its hands up in the air with respect to how it would settle its arrears, in particular to the taxpayers of this country. Sir, this prepayment clause allows us to address arrears, and it allows us to inject much-needed resources into the economy of this country. Now, let me be clear. In our paying down of arrears, we become or continue to be compliant and continue to be in line with the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan and the IMF Extended Fund Facility. And this is important. It allows us not just to make sure we meet that important anchor I referenced earlier of debt to GDP ratio, for which we have a target of 60% by 2033. So it not only allows us to be compliant and to make sure that we are focusing squarely on that target, but I want to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, that these numbers, and I hope the member for St. Michael East is listening, because he importantly points out that our business here is not about numbers. It is about people. So while we have to keep that anchor and we have to meet that target, that important debt to GDP anchor for the work program, in doing so, in making sure that we meet those targets, we are doing something else that's very important. And that is quite simply putting money back into the hands of individuals and putting money back into the hands of entities, businesses, corporations that need it in order to keep the people that they employ, whether that's 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or 200, keep them employed and to continue to function and thrive and be a part of the inclusive growth that is planned and targeted for this Barbados economy. And I want to make specific reference or give a specific example. Now, these amendments make particular reference to debt related to state-owned enterprises, debt that is owed to and through state-owned enterprises. But in general, sir, there are consequences of not settling your bills. We all know, on a personal level, there are consequences of not fulfilling your duty to pay people. And I hate to bring it up again, but I have to because the people of St. Michael South Central sent me. There is a reason, sir, that Flagstaff Road has taken as long as it has taken. And it's still, regrettably, not finished, but I am reliably advised, and I know the member for Christchurch West is a reliable man, that works will soon resume. But there's a reason. When an entity, a small contractor, a small business is owed money, that is money that that entity needs to keep its business going. So, you know, we make all kinds of assumptions about what the private sector looks like and what the private sector is able to do. But if I am not being paid, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I cannot continue to operate. And so what we had happening with much of the road infrastructure, sir, across this country, is that those contractors that were engaged to fix those roads, having not been paid for months and in some cases years, no longer had the wherewithal, sir, to employ people, to rent equipment, to buy materials, to go out and do the work that it was being asked to do. There are consequences, sir, when you do not pay your bills, when you do not settle your debt. And there are real consequences for real people. When this government first came to service, sir, to the people of this country, the member for Christchurch East Central, sir, and the Honourable Prime Minister, the member for St. Michael Northeast, would tell you that we could not stop receiving calls and questions from people who were owed tens of thousands, millions of dollars, and who were saying, not, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I want my money, which is a legitimate thing to say. They were saying, if we are not able to receive these resources, we are trying, but we don't know how much longer we can maintain our current complement of staff. They would say we are trying to hold on because we don't want to have to let anybody go. But sir, there are consequences. And so what these measures allow us to do are to address those outstanding debts that are connected to state-owned enterprises, to allow us to make sure that pensioners are paid, to allow us to make sure that those people who put their trust and their confidence in the capacity of a government to manage their finances, that they are not disappointed. So many of those people are relying on those resources to keep people employed, to send their grandchildren to school. We have a phenomenon in this country where we have higher levels of dependency on the incomes of the aging population. So you have grandmothers and grandfathers and great-grandmothers whose pensions are actually being used to help educate successive generations, to make sure they get something to eat before they go to school. The honourable member for St. Thomas knows this very well because she sees it every day. And these are the kinds of things that, separate from that very important anchor of 60% debt to GDP by 2033 that is going to allow us to keep this country focused on economic recovery. Separate from that, that is important, but separate from that, this allows us to allow people to provide for themselves and their families. I also want to make reference, sir, to something that's very important and very innovative that is also mentioned in the second schedule to this act. And it has to do with the natural disaster clause that offers both creditors and the government of Barbados protection against future debt distress that is caused by a major natural disaster. The reason this is important, sir, is that, and it gives us a 2-year reprieve in the event of a disaster with respect to interest and amortization payments related to debt. Now, last week, I believe it was, we had the privilege of attending the screening of some short films for the Blue Green Initiative, a group of tenacious, bright, proactive young people who, like so many young people across the world, have realized that this issue of climate resilience, this issue of climate change and our own survival is the issue of their generation. We have a duty to them to make sure we begin to address it. But it is one that they will have to confront squarely. It is the big issue of survival that their generation faces. And so they have been doing tremendous work to raise awareness about what climate resilience can look like. What does it mean? Sir, overnight in Dominica, we all know this story. That country lost 220% of its GDP. Now, the way that we have sought to address climate resilience so far, and when I say we, I mean globally, we look at issues related to adaptation and mitigation, and the Honourable Member for St. Michael South is leading tremendous effort to make sure that we are responsible for our behavior and how it affects the climate and how it affects our own survival. But the truth is that most of the measures that are being thought of do not even begin to address the scale of the issue. And I'll tell you what I mean. If we have a country the size of Barbados were to have a severe weather event of the kind that faced this region in the last couple of years, we are talking about total loss. We are talking about not just a certain percent, a small percent of what we're able to produce. We are talking about the fact that we will have to replace everything that characterizes life and livelihood for people in this country. And many of the measures that are being thought up, even some of the insurance facilities, do not really address that. And so our work as policymakers, our work as those who have been tasked with ensuring the survival of this generation and future generations, is to think of what are the kinds of things that we can do in policy, that we can build into policy, that will put us in a better position. There are fundamental human issues that you face when you wake up the next morning after a disaster like Irma or Maria. Fundamental issues of where you're going to get food and water, where you're going to get medicine, and whether you are safe and secure. And these are the things that, whatever resources you're able to mobilize, have to go towards making sure that people are safe, making sure that people can eat, making sure that people can live. To say nothing of how you get back up and running to be able to get your country going again. The majority of the losses that countries face that are related to a disaster have to do with lost production, the fact that a country cannot function, it cannot produce anything, it can't make anything, its economic infrastructure is also gone. And so when there is a disaster, a country cannot, or perhaps should not, be thinking about having immediately to continue to service debt, but instead should use whatever resources are available to make sure that people are safe and well and can start the process of rebuilding. And so this natural disaster clause is important for countries such as ours. And it is an example of how we can make sure that we use policy to address the very real issues of climate change and climate resilience. Finally, sir, I want, as gently guided by the member for Christchurch East Central, my colleague in the Ministry of Finance, to say a little bit about this matter of fiscal space and growth. In my opening, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I mentioned that this Debt Holder Amendment Act that we are debating today is about two very important things. One is that anchor that's part of the BERT program. But the other is something that the Honourable Prime Minister, the member for St. Michael Northeast, mentioned some time ago when she delivered her budget statement. And it has to do with the fact that we need some space. We need some fiscal space to be able to invest in Barbadians again. This economy, sir, did not grow for 10 years. And at the same time, there was not even the basic investment in services, in people, that would put them in a position to be able to contribute to growth. And I will tell you what I mean. We think, this Barbados Labour Party government thinks, that the fiscal space that is created by us paying down our debt, by us not having to service the debt at such high rates as before, means that we can invest for growth. What does investing for growth look like? We believe that investing in people's education and in people's health is the best platform for growth in any economy. There are those who argued, sir, that the policies that we outlined very early on, policies like having master teachers, were pie in the sky. There are even those who said that reintroducing free tertiary education was something that should not have been done. Well, I would want to say on behalf of the people in St. Michael South Central that they would beg to disagree. And I'm sure that other members in this chamber would report the same from the people who sent them here to represent them. Because that freed up some spending power that those households could now reinvest in other children, in other needs. This is not just about having fancy ideas. There are real consequences of when you make education something that people do not have to hurt their head about, and that has been the Barbadian tradition, and sir, I would humbly say it is one from which we should never deviate. That is the reason, sir, I stand before you today. That is the reason the member for St. Michael South and the member for Christchurch East Central and many of us,
All of us.
stand before you today. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the fact is that there's actually no higher investment return, if we want to talk about investment returns, that you can get than from those in public education and public health. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the average return in the international equity markets is around 7.5%. The returns that you get to education are estimated at over 17% for primary education and 11% for tertiary education. So in any system of mathematics, including that of the one for the former member for St. Lucie, in any mathematical system, there are higher returns from investing in people's education than any other investment you can make in any other market.
I'm enjoying your speech. The rules of the House that you have 5 more minutes.
That is fine, Mr. Speaker, sir. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So we believe that these are the kinds of investments that mean that those people who are well, who don't have to worry about health care, who don't have to worry about spending their own income on education, people who have the skills to participate in a new economy. Those are the investments that we need in order to grow. We believe, sir, that being able to invest in infrastructure allows us to be able to grow. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, we just completed a tremendous amount of work and a very significant engagement with groups of local, regional, and international investors, with whom we started a conversation about opportunities for real
Mechanism that within 5 years or so, the people will be able to exercise that right to determine if they had absolute power or not. But they had 10 years of criminal activity. Plus, we fighting with colonial impositions every day. They took some of the leading institutions, especially financial institutions, and they did what they had to do. As far back as the first 2 years or so, well, it has to be the first year, which is about 2008. They went to the central bank of this country, took up the taxpayers' money, $10 million, gave it to a company then called Clico, managed by criminals again, with a prime minister who was a criminal as well, and gave it to Clico. Everybody that had a modicum of common sense knew that was throwing a pint of water in the middle of the ocean by fraudulent means. And during that time, men and their wives and children became extremely wealthy in Barbados, while the masses of people walk around involved in a chant, clapping hands and dancing, that they are supporters of an institution called the DLP. And I am not surprised that the honorable member who just spoke, my sister, who just spoke, reflected on that. Because they now have the courage, because they have a perception of black people, their own, not other people, they have a perception of black people that all of them foolish. 11 months ago, the democratic mechanism we put in place to determine whether it should be rejected or not. I am not of the opinion that people vote because they love Trevor Prescott, the representative now of St. Michael's East, is because they didn't want the DLP. It was a rejection vote. Because people don't like criminals when people can't eat. And people stealing all the time. And nobody can't get a crumb from off the table. All that left to the people at that specific time was to take action on May the 24th. And that is what they did. And that is why you had a seat, which is the most important seat of victory on that specific time. The most important seat in my eyes is the seat that we took from them in St. John, which had 2 prime ministers. I don't mind anybody trying to justify that they wanted to keep the environment in its original form, to have these indigenous appearances in it. It was neglect. Nothing was done that was developmental in the community. And what international organizations that we depend on for measurements indicated it was the most backward area in the entire geography of Barbados. It had 2 Barbadian prime ministers. One is perceived as one of the best, if not the best, prime minister you've ever had. Optics. Parking a car on a hill and saying I was among the people. But it is more than that. It is more than that. Look, lots of things that we have done in order to alter situations, in order to provide the survival that is so necessary. It is a necessity that we stop and think. And that is why when the first argument that was sold in here about homegrown policy, I did not agree with it. It is no homegrown policy, certainly not this man. I am not in that home. The policy was a compromise on an imposition that came by the IMF and international financial institutions. It is part of a new policy that governments in these dependent states are forced to put in place. And if you want to argue it's the best that we can do with what little we have, within the nature of the powerlessness that exists within us, I can go with you on that. Do you really believe that any government with any social conscience would want to talk about balancing the economy, reducing debt, and then look and see poor people with an average of 5 and 6 children in their homes going home from work? Do you consciously and seriously think that I would believe that you are human if you tell me that this is a reflection of your efficiency and your credibility? That you have to make this recommendation to send home people because things are hard and you have no other choice? Do you really believe that I feel that you have to cut back on workers based on your own initiative? You borrow the people's money. And the people say, this is the terms and conditions on which I lend you. Every day and every night I weep, sir. Literally so. Because I have friends and family that when they put their position to me, I have to find an excuse, and I am not capable of doing so, why it is happening to us. But we have to deal with people who are not using Gatlings or machine guns
or any form of modern technology for military purposes in order to keep us in captivity, but they're now using their educational and financial institutions to make sure they keep their subjects in order. But don't tell me that we are doing this because we are bright and efficient. It is not true. You might be bright because you find a balance, a compromise, so that you wouldn't go unduly and put excessive pressures on the people. But how much more can you do? And over the years, what I have witnessed is that when countries try to deal with these issues, the countries find themselves in economic chaos. I've seen it in Jamaica. I've seen it from a political perspective in Grenada. I mean, I've been seeing it all over. And I am not happy about that. I am not blaming anybody about that. I am blaming those who want to take responsibility for criminal acts, both locally in politics and externally in global politics as well, based on the things that the US government do to us and Europe through the EU. All kind of wicked things after accumulating wealth over the years as a consequence of raping and plundering these countries over and over again. And our people are expecting us to perform miracles when they gave us the support on the 24th of May. They expected us to help people to walk on water. And we don't have to face these people out there every day telling them we will get there. We are not there yet, but in the days, in the interim between where we are now and where we intend to go, there's going to be severe human sacrifice. You know, I was talking to my colleagues who urged me to say something because they say, not me, they say that they want to hear a different perspective. I was reluctant because in an effort to give another view, which I believe that this parliament so badly needed, because when you get 30 seats and you rejoice at just the figure, there are other things that you have to think about. Sometimes people refuse to give objectivity to their application of judgment. And therefore, it is almost like everybody echoing the voice of some other body. Nobody seems to have any independent judgment. Nobody have had any new experiences. I hear people talk about when they meet colleagues that were working close with them in the trenches. The colleagues are upset. I don't want a journalist on Facebook to tell me that. You only have to be in the East Coast Road or walking through your community in the ghetto or on the Ermeybourne Highway. And I'm glad to see that the honorable member for St. Andrew recognized the importance of Ermeybourne coming to Parliament as the first black woman in the House of Assembly. Those things mean a lot to me. I would like to believe that at least I don't have a colleague that I know respect the things that I say. I also told him...
You don't believe.
That's my belief. I can't give it short. But I also told him that he too. I'm not judging him for what the member of St. Michael's East thinks about him. But I want him to know that every time people send you back to Parliament, regardless of what other people were saying or what people are saying no. It is a testimony of the confidence that they have in you. And if you are not judged based and given the rewards based on the people's judgment, well, then I would have to come to the conclusion, like most people who think negatively, that people are ignorant. And I am not going to share that view. I believe that you have made a major contribution to the general development of Barbados. I am hoping that you will also defy a lot of prophets who want to predict your future, sir. Let the people determine that. Do not be guided by age. You just have to, I'm not going to recommend that to you. Don't be governed by age or anything like that. Like the Burt plan.
Yes.
The Burt plan.
Yes,
The Burt plan. The Burt plan, sir, it has caused us to make some alterations. I don't know if some people even believe that it is by a man named Burt, but I don't got to be full Burt. But in my view, sir, I am not going to blame, and I am honest with the Barbadian public, I am not going to blame the Barbados Labour Party, the party to which I belong, the party to which I respect, the party who I believe by some divine intervention is here at this point in history because we are the institution that is responsible for rescuing the people. And I said it before, there are times in history where we saw changes. And my changes might not always be on par with what we're thinking here now, but there are times in history great people emerge. I personally believe that, and I don't even want to describe it, but it's the most simple way that I can. The leader of this party has reached almost movie star status, sir. Not because of simple cosmetic reasons, but because it's like, I don't want to say if she's an agent of the divine, and people gather around her. The expectations of her, they are extremely high, and in my view, sometimes they go beyond human capacity to rescue every human being in this country and in the diaspora. Expect her to make the fundamental changes in an environment that is hostile to the general development of small states. I am responsible for the environment. And in terms of statistics, the figures, we make a very narrow contribution to the climate change across the world. But we have the biggest responsibility, because the reality is that we'll be hurt first, more so than the others. I have actually urged the Minister of Maritime Affairs and all the other ministers that are involved to understand the kind of responsibility which we have, because we're dealing with the ignorance of a Donald Trump, a man who believes that he can plant leadership across the Caribbean, and that includes the Bolivarian Republic. A man who believes that he can say what he likes, even about climate change. And that's what I'm talking about, external factors. Exogenous material and entities who want to dictate what we do in this country, what rules and regulations and laws that we can pass in relation to our own freedom to think and our own freedom to use a legal instrument that can contribute to our development. and we find ourselves in a so-called sovereign democratic state having to be involved in compromise politics. Compromise politics. Many of us, we are forced to do what we don't want to do. Don't mind all this, look, scholarship is important. Don't mind what social commentators out there saying. Some of the people who criticizing this government can't make a box cart. Some of them can't run the tray of a vendor that only got in 2 items, akis and plums. Nothing complex. The only thing they might be able to manage a post office that probably bear a 5-cent stamp and a 10-cent stamp. But if they get anything with $4.16 and subtract it from a $20 US, they got to go for machines and call about 17 people before they get back change. But they understand how to manage an economy. All of a sudden, people that never was so bright at school, they will see the reports. They understand political science. They're economists. All these things we have to face with. And we are supposed to deliver. I believe that we are capable of delivering. But what I don't like is I am not going to accept any responsibility for the hardships that we are forced to inflict on brothers and sisters, not based on any ancestral foundations alone, but direct blood relations. Sometimes you're in a position where you have to give priority to a friend over your brother, because you don't want to appear to be involved in nepotism. This is the environment that we live in. Or you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you've got to argue to eternity that because of some special skills that somebody possesses, you believe that they're the person's best fit for the job. And you have to give the job to somebody in the environment sometimes that probably might got qualities totally inferior to another person. Don't be impressed by a man who you say was overcharging the state overnight by millions and thousands of dollars. And then the man comes to the table and says, I gotta make a little adjustment in price. Something cost $10,000. A man charges in this economy. He call you a smart businessman. He has the commercial acumen to be able to put things in place in such a way that he knows how to make profit or he knows how to manage. And in many cases, the man inflates prices. But when he sees the whole kingdom going to collapse, he comes back and tells him, we deflated here now. So he comes back now and tells you, I was charging you $10,000 before, I will now do it for you for $250. I mean, you don't think? You don't think? You don't understand what mine was at $10,000 and now come and do it for $250. And you say you sacrifice. Sacrifice what? He was poking out your eyes all the time. And you see that you now get a glimpse of the truth. Or somebody who was not a beneficiary to the little maneuvering that went on. Gets kid out, he ain't got the partner in this contraband activity. So he now comes and want to play he's no human. You now see the eyes of the master and he asks him for forgiveness. So all of a sudden now, you get a discount. He get a discount. Nobody invited me to the parties. Let's party in the Ivy. Let's party with my friends. We want to go over there, look and see what we're talking with. And my people. And I know these are the people who educate me every day. Every day. Because I don't want to as the former Prime Minister said, want to leave anybody behind. So don't be fooled by the agents of the external principles who doing the same thing that their principal do overseas in international trade. The same models that apply in international trade are inflating prices way beyond the service and the commodities that they are offering. It's the same principle that they apply at all times.
Member has 3 minutes more.
I am, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am extremely grateful for the time that you've given me, including the 3 minutes. But we are in a new world. I want you, all of us, to see it as a new world. Radical changes must be made. It's a new world order. Thank you, Representative St. Thomas. A new world order. Radical changes must be made. If we do not make the radical changes, we will pay the price. All the restructuring and the reforming, the changes has to be made here. It is not an academic exercise, because the transport workers want to hear something innovative. And if the Prime Minister says to them that we are going to transfer ownership to people who are now drivers and employees, and you're going to make them owners and employers, they just want to hear a comprehensive program, and we can't delay. We have to move swiftly to make it happen. If we cannot employ people in some circumstances, but a void is there where we can have contractual relationships with people, and that the state must no longer take the load, and those people have contractual relationships. We've got to make sure that we open up opportunities for ordinary people, at least to get subcontracts and all kinds of things, right? Because we have to deal now with equity and a distribution of the resources of this country. I am not supportive of any individual or any institution that wants us to take the blame for what is happening in this society. I mean, more and more, look, education must undergird the wisdom that we share with our people across Barbados. It must be explained, because we have distortionists going around telling people over and over again, you see the Barbados Labour Party fool you? You see the people fool you? You get put out of work. They were critical of you all along. They had promised the paradise and the promised land. They promised you that you will walk on water, and now you can't even get water. And the representatives of St. Andrew and St. Joseph and all these people would have been experiencing that. I want us to become conscious that if we do not send the messages out to the masses of people across Barbados of how tough this opportunity is, of this moment in history is for all of us, ministers of finance, ministers of economic affairs, ministers of the environment, minister of agriculture. All of these changes, we are in the midst of climate change. And the Minister of Agriculture has to play a role as well. The Minister of Energy has to be dealing with all kinds of chemicals and emissions and fossil fuel challenges and alternative forms of energy. I want to take the opportunity to thank you very much for making the Ivy the first example of what we can do in the community centers across Barbados. I was saying that we were talking a lot about the challenges that we are facing from climate change. And we are talking about a lot of ideas and interacting on the international stage, a lot of poetry, senseless one. But you were able to put a program together to execute an element that serves as a form of mitigation, an alternative form. He introduced the photovoltaic system in the Ivy last week, complemented by about 6 large batteries. And he explained to me an area which I was totally ignorant of. He said to me, if the sunlight goes down for 3 days as a result of bad weather or rain, the excessive energy goes into the batteries, and the batteries store the electricity there, and I can still have current. If tomorrow morning I have any challenges in my community, and I had a blackout completely, or Barbados Light Point had an issue that had a national blackout, or if we had a hurricane storm, whatever, I can assure the people in the Ivy House in there that as long as the architecture and the construction in that centre can stand up to the challenges, they have a place that they can go to and enjoy comfort. And that's what I'm talking about. The restructuring program all across Barbados, sir, I don't understand the necessity of it, but I know that members, including the economic fraternity, I know that they spend lots of nights and lots of days trying to find the alternative model that is so necessary. So I just want to keep re-emphasizing, I'm not critical of it, I'm not critical of the discipline, but I expect more. I expect them to expand. And I expect them that every element that they highlight, they can also give me the social implications of the element that they put into place. I understand the importance of economics, but I also understand the importance of political economy. And that when you come to these quarters, it's not about being an economist, it's about understanding political economy, the social benefits from any adjustments we are making. Mr. Deputy Chairman, thank you very much for enduring the punishment that came from me.
You're welcome. Member for it.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the sitting be suspended for lunch until 2 p.m.
Seconded? Seconded, please. Question is that this will be now suspended for lunch until 2 p.m. today. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This House is now suspended until 2 p.m. today.
suffering with cancer. They've worked with the Barbados Vagrants and Homeless Society as it relates to their shelter program. And this is like trying to find a home for that particular organization. Special needs educational projects, and this resolution ties right into that particular initiative. They've worked with the Pinelands Creative Workshop. They've worked with the University of the West Indies as it relates to providing a bus for those students who need to use a wheelchair. Sunshine Early Stimulation Center, and they're providing 16 scholarships for those young persons to engage in education. I Am a Girl Barbados, and this is another initiative that targets particularly young girls who are at risk. Mr. Speaker, the Maria Holder Trust Foundation is one that is doing work that should be imitated by a lot of other organizations within communities and on island. And they've worked with us as government, they've worked with registered NGOs at community level, they've worked with other charities as well. And I mentioned that the tenets of this particular organization extend beyond the shores of Barbados. They've worked in Antigua and Barbuda, they've worked in the BVI, they've worked in Dominica, and as a matter of fact, in Dominica, they've engaged the Ministry of Education to refurbish 6 schools as a result of the impact of the hurricane that hit Dominica. They've worked in Grenada, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. So, in actual fact, this is a solid, very, very solid charity that is doing work on the island. And I've identified before the areas of work: education, training, healthcare, culture, emergency disaster, and poverty alleviation. The target population revolves around the youth and the elderly and those in vulnerable and difficult circumstances. So we look at individuals like the block culture, we look at elderly programs and things of this nature. Now, as it relates to other areas, the Honorable Minister of Youth would have recently benefited from an initiative from the Maria Holder Trust in relation to transforming that old Minimart supermarket in Silver Hill into a youth center. And we have seen where they've engaged CXC in terms of providing assistance in constructing the building at that location in the Pine. So the Maria Holder Trust Foundation is a registered charity here, legit. And one of the things that they have done is a MOU was signed with the previous administration to construct 6 primary schools on 6 nursing schools on this island. And this particular resolution speaks to the leasing of 5,000 square meters of land to do the Maria Holder nursing school. Nursery, right, at Old Bury St. Philip. So one of the things that happened so far is that 3 of those primary schools, Mr. Speaker, was constructed, and this is just another one in that line of nursery schools to be constructed by the Maria Holder Trust. And in the cabinet paper is asking for a couple things. For example, the lease to be for a term of 30 years. So in actual fact, the school will be leased for a period of 30 years. The rent is documented at $1,500 per annum. The Ministry of Education and Technical Vocation Training will be responsible for the maintenance and the upkeep of the school. The school will be insured for the amount of $2 million. It is also documented here that the trust shall give 8 months. The trust will give 8 months notice should they wish to terminate the lease, Mr. Speaker. So this particular resolution is one that the Ministry of Housing and Lands fully support. as it relates to the development of our educational system on the island. And I believe that eventually all of the MPs in this August chamber will probably benefit from the work of the Murray Holder Trust in one way or another. So I'm asking that this particular resolution be passed, and I beg your indulgence in dealing with this particular resolution. I thank you.
Honourable Member for St. Michael Heath.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My legitimacy for participating in this exercise is simple. This is located in the haven of academia. I always like to think about Springer School, St. Giles, both St. Giles School, Charles F. Brooms, Belmont School, Rantley Prescott School, the BCC, Barbados Community College, and the Israel Level Foundation. I heard special mention was made of Pinelands, but the Israel Level Foundation, who also take a major responsibility in complementing everything that the other academic institutions are doing within the community, sir. That location is also signaged by a major investment of an estate belongs to a member of this site. I understand that he has lots of the efforts, even with some of the schools in close proximity. This is a major addition to the contribution that is being made there in that community. The thing about the same school that I'm talking about is kind of pre-primary, a nursery school, and the plant is only a complement of everything that is happening there. The truth is that children can interact better. They learn to appreciate, as a result of the social environment, people of all different social backgrounds. They learn to interact better. And children who are from professional homes, semi-professional homes, are mixing with the offspring of lay persons from within my community and from other communities across Barbados. So we could better appreciate the integrated effort that is forged as a result of being in that social environment, also compounded by the educational opportunities available to it. To the children there, I want to thank, as was described, this philanthropic individual who offers major contributions to the state and to the people of Barbados for the admirable contributions that he's making. Last time I heard him, he said that this was part of the in the will, apart from the material and monetary benefits coming out of it, there were certain immaterial requirements that his mother requested of him. And he said that his mother asked him to give back, and that she believes that Barbados is a country that is worthy of the contributions which he can afford to make as a beneficiary of both the written and the unwritten will of the deceased. And I am pleased to know that we still have human beings on earth who think in that manner. And so I want to compliment the philanthropic thinking of the Murray Holder Trust, the son of Murray Holder, and I also want to thank the Ministry of Housing and Lands for responding in the manner in which they have responded. I've been told that the Murray Holder Trust has already constructed about 12 play parks of this kind. I've heard that they've been contributing to the educational plan as well. And on the last occasion when we opened up the facilities in St. Thomas, the indication was that they're prepared to at least make another 11 contributions, and I don't think that they will stop there. I would really like at some point to request them to contribute to the botanical gardens so they can come up and help us to achieve the development of the botanical gardens, which is so badly in need of funding, and help us to, since I know that they have a social conscience, help us to really achieve the completion of that facility as well. So on behalf of the people of my community, on behalf of the government of Barbados, I want to thank the persons for making this important contribution, and I support this resolution, sir.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the resolution before the House, this vesting resolution, which, as those who have spoken before indicated, has to do with the vesting of lands, of property with the Murray Holden Memorial Trust for the purpose of the construction of a nursery school in Government Hill. And I would want to agree with and restate that the Murray Holden Memorial Trust has been in the forefront of contributing to the education of particularly children, both the education of and in some cases the housing of children, the children of Barbados. And when I say they've been in the forefront, I will want, as the minister responsible for the third sector relations, to say that I'm saying in the forefront, and I am specifically referring to the quantum, the dollar value quantum of their contributions in the areas that I've identified. The reason why I want at the outset to indicate that is because there are other third sector organizations, other civil society organizations that are also involved and have been involved for quite a long period of time, but do not have the same level of financial backing. And I would not want, as minister responsible for those relations, to give the impression that the contribution of those lesser resourced civil society organizations is not as important to government. So I want that to be clear. But the Murray Holden Memorial Trust has been in the forefront as it relates to the value, the dollar value of their contribution. My mind goes back to one of my early forays as a candidate for St. Peter. Well, before I was a candidate, I was assigned by my right honourable predecessor to attend the opening of a refurbished Fars Children's Home, which is now the Marina Brewster Home at Fars. And at that point, maybe about 4 years ago, I was, yes, it was maybe 2014, 2015. But at that point, I was able to see up close and personal the kind of contribution that the Murray Holden Memorial Trust was making in the development of the country. I heard in this ceremony from those trustees who were there. I heard the then government's response, and I was able to participate in a tour of the facility after the official ceremony. And I want to commend the Murray Holden Memorial Trust for their work as a civil society organization in building young people, children, providing for their education, and also providing for their housing in Barbados. Now, Mr. Speaker, investment in children and young people is critical to the growth and development of a country, critical to the growth and development of a society. Because a nation's ability to continue beyond one generation really hinges or is built on the capacity of succeeding generations. And so if there is no investment in the children and young people of a country, then those of us who stand in leadership at any time in history are really participants in precipitating the breakdown of a state, of a society, of communities, of households, and the implosion of those institutions. And so the focus of the Murray Holden Memorial Trust on building young people, building even from the kindergarten age, from the nursery age, I think is something that ought to be commended. I do not believe that it is any indication that any generation has been lost, but it is a recognition that while some organizations will speak to and address the issues of youth, older people, working people, that there have to be some organizations that address people at the point where they're now developing their values, where their ethics now come into being, where they're now beginning to understand themselves and decide on what is right and what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. At that age, the Murray Holden Memorial Trust has created their interventions because I believe the principals, the trustees, recognize that we have to build children even at the youngest age. Because people, Mr. Speaker, in a country like Barbados that has limited, very limited natural resources, people are our resource. People have built this country. You know, when I say that, I also, unfortunately, have to say that people have destroyed the country as well. And I'm not talking about the people on the blocks. I'm talking about some people who sat in this honorable chamber. But that, I don't want to dwell on anything that makes me too sad. People have been the resource that this country, and many countries in the Caribbean and countries around the world, people have been the resource that we as countries have leaned on to build. And any intervention that seeks to build people is an intervention that is to be commended. And I recall in the earlier debate, the debate just concluded that the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central spoke to the fact that were it not for educational opportunities, that many of us would not be in this chamber today. And I want to add to that, to say to you, Mr. Speaker, but particularly to the country, that those who attempted not too long ago to destroy the aspirations and dreams of ordinary working class young people in Barbados were themselves beneficiaries of educational opportunities, but sought, when the going got tough, to kick down, as we would say in St. Peter, the ladder that they stepped up on. And I say that, Mr. Speaker, knowing and understanding that were it not for the country as a whole deciding that the country would pay for the education of young people rather than asking individual families to pay for their own children's education, that the country would do it as a collective. Were it not for that situation, many of those who try to destroy the dreams of youth would not have been in a position so to do. And I want to say that as a country, we have to recognize that building our people is preeminent. It must have first dibs on the resources of the country, because the people of the country, the people of Barbados, will build Barbados. I want to say, as I say that, to the country, through you, Mr. Speaker, that the country must not, again in the future, allow any government to destroy the possibility of building and enhancing that resource upon which the sustainability of our society is dependent. The country should never in the future allow it to happen. There are many other civil society organizations, Mr. Speaker, that are involved in development. There are many, and the Honourable Member for the City speaks to this from time to time. There are many organizations operating in the healthcare sphere, civil society organizations, whether they're NGOs or community-based organizations, but operating or faith-based organizations as well. In civil society, many organizations out there that are working hard with whatever resources they have to contribute to the building of a society, whether it is actively promoting building and development or addressing deficits that they may see, issues that need to be addressed in order for people to be able to live in a society in some degree of comfort. And so there are almost every health challenge has an NGO, some civil society organization addressing the matter. There are civil society organizations, I'm a Girl was mentioned by the Honourable Member for St. John, and there are youth civil society organizations. There are civil society organizations that address various, what sometimes communities or societies refer to as minority issues. But these civil society organizations are critical to the development of a country. In the best of times, a government will not have the resources to address every need that needs to be addressed in a society, even in the best of times. And so governments, successive governments, rely on civil society organizations to use the term, pick up the slack in the project of nation building. There are many issues, all of which are important, that need to be addressed. Government cannot do it alone, and government, this government in particular, the government of which I'm a part, we all in here are a part, is a government that recognizes that we need to partner with those civil society organizations that have as their mandate the building of our society and the addressing of some of the critical needs that exist out there in our society. And so this government is committed to assisting and to the facilitation of the development of the third sector. The third sector, and I am always conscious that while we speak in this honorable chamber, there are persons who are not in here and who may not understand everything that we say. So when we speak to third sector, most people know about the public sector, government and its related entities, and I think most people know about the private sector, essentially business organizations, commercially oriented organizations that exist to make a profit for those who have invested. And then there's the third sector, which is made up of civil society organizations and generally evolving out of volunteer activity, but increasingly becoming more structured. These organizations, because of their birth, and in some cases because of how they've developed, there have been certain issues that have arisen that have mitigated against the continual development of some of these organizations. And so many organizations remain small, remain not well funded, not well administered, and too often centered around one or two or three persons. And so there are issues of governance. And coming out of issues of governance, then there are issues of credibility. Organizations become credible when it is recognized that their governance, how they are managed, how they are structured, can bear the test of scrutiny. You would understand, Mr. Speaker, why this Barbados Labour Party government would see this as an issue. Because ever since assuming the office of government, of managing this country, we have placed what may be termed extraordinary emphasis on governance. And I say what may be termed extraordinary emphasis only because if in the last decade there had been even the slightest attention to governance, then what we've done, even if we had to do something, would not have been of the magnitude that we've ended up having to do. But governance is an issue in third sector development, the development of civil society organizations. Accountability has also been another issue, could be considered part of governance. But how does a civil society organization handle and manage its resources? Because it wants to attract additional resources. But in order to attract additional resources, those who would give need to have some comfort that the organization that is requesting funds or the organization that they are thinking of supporting will handle those resources well, properly, and in a way that benefits the intended beneficiaries of the work of the organization. So that governance and credibility and accountability all impact the ability of a civil society organization to attract additional funding. And then, Mr. Speaker, there is the issue of the sustainability of third sector organizations. Anybody starting an organization wants the organization to live on. Sometimes because of legacy considerations, sometimes because after putting in so much work, you do not want the organization to disappear once you have left the organization. So there are issues of sustainability, and in the Barbados context, we have met, my ministry's officials and myself, with many civil society organizations, and one of the factors affecting sustainability, sustainability of the organizations, have to do with funding. And that is an area that needs some attention. There are also other sustainability issues that would fall under the whole matter of governance and how other people are involved and included in the civil society, the specific civil society organizations. Mr. Speaker, these are issues that have to be addressed because civil society organizations, I repeat, address critical social needs in a country, address critical needs that a government is not able to address. And I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that even if a government had all the financial resources to address some of these issues, Nothing can replace the passion of a person who is on the ground in a particular area and who is intent on addressing a particular need. And so, Mr. Speaker, if I speak to, let's use, for example, a cancer society. A person who has lost a family member to cancer will have a passion to find help, as in the cancer support services, help for those who are afflicted by the disease. They will also have a passion to see increased research on finding cures for the disease. And I speak to it, Mr. Speaker, because I've lost relatives to the disease. My sister, who I loved dearly. Nobody can replace the passion of a person who has encountered that kind of loss. It cannot be replicated by finding a public servant to lead an organization to intervene in that kind of a matter. And so it is important that civil society organizations are supported and are facilitated, because that passion is important in addressing the particular social needs that the organization has been set up to address. There's also the benefit, Mr. Speaker, of the funding inflows. And this is a tangential benefit, because this is not the reason why civil society organizations are set up. It is a tangential benefit, but it is a benefit that is important to a country, especially a small, open economy like ours that is vulnerable to external shocks, that is dependent on external activity for foreign exchange inflows. And so the donations that can come from external sources to civil society organizations become an important consideration for a country such as ours. And this government is intent on developing the civil society organizations, the third sector, so that this tangential benefit can assist the country in its macroeconomic development. There's also the other benefit of encouraging volunteer activity, volunteerism, encouraging people to get involved in organizations where the lives of individuals in communities can be touched directly, not through public officers, but directly on the ground by people who are passionate. And as we look around the landscape at civil society organizations, we recognize that they draw onto themselves persons who are similarly passionate about certain issues. And these civil society organizations, these third sector organizations, have that potential and indeed have demonstrated that they are able to galvanize volunteers to put their energies, to put their resources, and to put their mental capacity into driving the work of these organizations. Government recognizes that with these benefits, and having identified the issues or challenges that face many third sector organizations, many civil society organizations, many NGOs, non-governmental organizations, many CBOs, community-based organizations, we recognize as a government that we have a role to play in assisting the third sector, in assisting in the development of civil society organizations. And so we are intent on creating a legislative framework that will allow for the better management and will allow for the better facilitation of civil society organizations. We have been working closely with the Caribbean Policy Development Center. As a ministry, we've had multiple engagements The Caribbean Policy Development Center is an umbrella body for NGOs in the Caribbean region, and that organization has been in the forefront of asking for the establishment of this legislative framework that will allow for the facilitation and the development, the orderly facilitation and the orderly development of civil society organizations. And the fruit of our discussions and our collaboration has been that on April the 8th, the Caribbean Policy Development Center has been able to present to the Ministry of Labour and Social Partnership Relations a document, which I will make a document of the House, a document called, or titled, A Call for NGO Legislation in Barbados, a white paper submitted to the government of Barbados. And in this document, Mr. Speaker, after having listened to government, NGOs, civil society organizations across Barbados, they've come up with some guidelines that my ministry intends to use as we construct the framework that will allow for the build-out and the development of civil society organizations in Barbados. And so I would like to, in this honorable chamber, thank the program director and the staff of CPDC, the Caribbean Policy Development Center, for all the work. I also want to thank the JEF program of United Nations Development Program, UNDP. They were integral in assisting the Caribbean Policy Development Center in the process that has led to the creation of what they've termed a white paper on the call for NGO legislation. I want to thank both CPDC and UNDP for the work in this regard, and to say to them publicly that we will be using their work, our work, as we build out the framework for civil society legislation, that framework that will allow for the building of capacity and the improvement in the possibilities for these civil society organizations to be able to effectively do the work that they are so passionate about. I want, Mr. Speaker, to reiterate my support for this vesting resolution. History has shown that the work of the Maria Holder Memorial Trust has redounded to the benefit of Barbadians. The Marina Brewster home at Fars is in my constituency, and I go there every Christmas, and we spend time with the children, members of my branch and myself. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, when people, but especially children, are in a facility that looks good, that looks as though people paid attention to it, the children respond. And the children who live at the Marina Brewster home, a home that was redeveloped by the Maria Holder Memorial Trust, those children act with a certain degree of pride in their surroundings. And if you go there at Christmas, you will see that the children will tell you, you know, I put up these decorations, and I put up, and one young man, I don't remember his name, he did the lights, proud of the facility, because an organization, namely the Maria Holder Memorial Trust, took the time and took the resources to create for children who many of us forget about. But they took the time and the resources to create for the children of Barbados, in my constituency, but in others as well, a facility where those children who live there feel proud of their surroundings. They're already on the back foot, Mr. Speaker. You are a man well-versed in social work. And you would know that those children are already on the back foot. And we don't want them to end up with you in your new dispensation as an attorney representing, well, not representing, but operating in the criminal jurisdiction. We don't want them to get there. And so there has to be an investment in those children from an early age. And the Maria Holder Memorial Trust has been working assiduously to ensure that the young people of this country are given a chance. I want to support not just what they've done in St. Peter, but around the country. We've seen what they've done, and I want to use what they have done to say to other civil society organizations, you may not be as well resourced, but based on your size and on your capacity, you could be proportionately as impactful and create as much benefits proportionately as an organization like the Maria Holder Memorial Trust. I want to say to other civil society organizations, government recognizes your work. Government sees your role as important. Government wants to partner with you. And just as you've been involved in the process that led to the preparation of the white paper, you will also be involved in the process that leads to the development of a legislative framework to manage the facilitation and the development of the third sector, civil society organizations, NGOs, and CBOs in Barbados. I want to say, keep doing your good work. And even if, as we say, those of us who are from faith-based persuasions, even if you don't get any accolades down here, you will get your accolades from the Lord. But always remember that the work that you are doing is a work for people. And the book to which I subscribe, the Bible, has a verse in it that says, "Inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these your brethren, you have done it unto God." And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I commend this legislation to the Honourable House.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will be very brief this afternoon. I, of course, wish to commend the resolution. I want to thank the Honourable Ministers and the Ministry of Housing for bringing it. And of course, naturally, sir, I want to thank the Maria Holder Trust, who's done brilliant work in Barbados for many of us and in many of our constituencies. Mr. Speaker, sir, I listened this morning to the first debate. And that debate, sir, was in relation to debt and the state in which the country finds itself, sir. And it is interesting to me as I listen to the Honourable Member for St. Peter, as he spoke very passionately, sir, and I agree with everything he said. But it occurred to me, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we need to have a conversation around the nature of philanthropy in a neoliberal era. A conversation around why it becomes even more increasingly important for persons in this era to step in and to fill the gap, sir, that is created in many cases when countries pursue a neoliberal agenda. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I believe, sir, that at the onset I should say that the Maria Holder Trust is the embodiment in many ways of what a good philanthropic organization should be. And that beyond just offering money or throwing money behind issues, sir, a genuine problem-solving entity committed to a country or committed to a cause, Mr. Speaker, sir, driven primarily by an altruism and a desire to see people's welfare improve. And I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to have that conversation about why these organizations become increasingly more and more necessary. And as a country goes through difficult times, it is necessary for other people, other entities, to carry some of the burdens, sir, that traditionally would have been carried by the government. Most of the governments in the Caribbean, sir, come from a different philosophical background. We weren't all of a neoliberal mind in the early days, Mr. Speaker, sir. We had a philosophy, sir, driven by Keynesian economics, the idea that the state plays a larger role and that the state should be the driver of most things. And as the state becomes less and less equipped to be able to deal with those things, sir, we need more and more support from NGOs, from these large charitable organizations, from deeper organizations involved in philanthropy, sir. And therefore I feel, as I listen to the debate this morning, I listen to the one we're having now, that we need to talk about this in a neoliberal era. Sir, and what do I mean by that? Sir, most of the islands in the Caribbean, most of them, if not all of them, sir, found themselves having a debt problem. Most of the islands in the Caribbean, sir, if not all of them, found themselves struggling to be able to finance themselves and to pay their bills. And it is interesting, Mr. Speaker, sir, that as the world has somehow converged on the idea, driven by the Washington Consensus many years ago, that you need to have a neoliberal policy agenda, as the world converged on that idea, many of the smaller countries find themselves becoming increasingly poorer and poorer. More and more difficult for small countries to be able to survive. And that there is a relationship between the economic policies that you pursue, the philosophy that drive it, sir, and the realities that then eventually face countries. It is no surprise to me that many of us go to the IMF or have to go back to the IMF or organizations like the IMF, Mr. Speaker, sir. And it becomes more and more relevant for organizations like the Maria Holder Trust to do those things even as we struggle through very difficult times, to help us through them, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I would say, sir, these policies have been very hard on people. Neoliberal policies in total have been hard on people. And, sir, if you look across the world, you know, in the 1980s, the general conversation and into the early 90s was that you have to open up your markets and have free markets and allow this and no barriers to trade and all kind of things. Big people talk for unfair and small people, Mr. Speaker, sir. And it is clear to me that without a radical and a definite and determined desire to reframe the way we understand the world and engage in the world, sir, we will find ourselves one day there, next day out, back there, sir. I feel as if we have, Mr. Speaker, sir, to understand that, you know, you're going to create these massive gaps all the time. All the time. The government is not able to do what it used to do. The policy programs that we pursue overall may not allow us to do it. And I therefore have to thank really organizations like the Trust for stepping up and fulfilling the gap that becomes inevitable if you pursue the wrong policies. And Mr. Speaker, sir, you know, what is measured gets done. And so we drive a country now on the desire, the idea that you must measure certain things. You must measure GDP, of course. You must measure this and you must measure that. And those are the things that you want to get done. But, sir, I am happy that this government also wants to measure the improvement in the lives of people. Because if you don't measure it, sir, it does not get done. And therefore, you could have a whole policy prescription trying to do the things that are to be measured, doing the wrong things. Mr. Speaker, sir, I spent my whole life in the social policy sector, social services sector. I've been doing community work, not to the extent to which the Honourable Member for St. Michael East has done it, but nobody here has. Very few people in Barbados have done it. But I understand, sir, that there needs to be an entity outside of the government in an era where a government now must be forced to pursue neoliberal policy agendas, especially, that fills the gap that is created by such policies. And I wanted to use this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, sir, to say very boldly that we need, sir, in this time, to talk differently to corporate Barbados. We do. And that because of the way the country, the state, the country finds itself in, we also have now organizations at the Maria Holder Trust, yes, but we have organizations and businesses, sir, in our communities who do not wish to do anything for the people in the very same community in which they are located. We do. And, sir, I feel that we have to use this opportunity to call on the businesses, sir, to be good corporate citizens and to engage the communities, sir, that they are located in, and the very same people who do business oftentimes with their businesses. So that we have to have the idea of philanthropy. Yes, we need it, but we need good corporate citizens looking out for the communities too. So that in the city of Bridgetown, for example, where there are no more places in Barbados that got more businesses than the city, sir, you could walk through Broad Street, see a lot of shops. In the last 10 years, they admit that they had it hard. But look at the surrounding areas just beyond the city. And that if you can move, sir, the thinking beyond the profit margin to the improvements in the lives of people, we could make a real difference, sir, in this country. And I will always commend the Maria Holder Trust. I got to know them when I worked at the Child Care Board. And I know that they did wonderful work, sir, for the children. But I feel that we could do more. And that if corporate Barbados were to help the honorable member, whoever it is, and this time it is a good man, but if they were to help the honorable member for the city, sir, the surrounding areas shouldn't be struggling in the city, but there are the most businesses in Barbados in the city, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the idea of giving back has to become a part of who we are and how we operate. Corporate Barbados, individuals, sir. It doesn't stop there. There are people, sir, who grew up in hard communities, and their only desire is to get out of the communities that they grew up in and never go back. I'm telling you, the reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the problem isn't only with corporate Barbados, the problem is also with individuals. We all have to get back and give back to communities that gave us something. I remember all of the people in my community who gave something to me, sir. Up to this weekend, I was still in the community that I grew up in. Mr. Speaker, sir, the people who shaped most of us will never be in a book. Their names will not be etched in stone, but they're etched in your heart. And they're etched in your children's heart, I would hope, because you tell them these stories too. Mr. Speaker, sir, I feel we can do a lot more, corporate Barbados, sir, individuals, sir. Maria Holder Trust has done a lot and continues to do a lot, and I am thankful. But we can also do something too, Mr. Speaker, sir. And while I was the director, sir, of a government agency, I remember, Mr. Speaker, sir, we wrote to a number of NGOs, civil society organizations. Your member for St. Peter will probably attest to this now. And a lot of these organizations, sir, exist only on paper. We sent out and we wrote to a number of them. And the amount of mail that came back, unopened. First of all, the mailman can't find them, never heard of them, nothing. They only exist on paper, worst case. Then there are some that only exist, Mr. Speaker, sir, because they want to say they exist. But you can have no history of the work that they have done. None. No history of the work they have done at all. And then As it evolves, sir, there's something you bring to the table. I am being real. Because if Barbados is to evolve and to move from this position, sir, everybody has to do something in the deal. There is sometimes when you bring them to the table, sir, no real interest in the development of people. Some of them, not all. No real interest in the development of people. Interested in funding. How can I get funding for so-and-so or for this and for that, sir? But then you say, but I haven't seen what you've been doing. Show me your track record. You can't get it. It's a fact. And at the very top, of course, there are great organizations that have done wonderful work for years at Israel Level, sir, and like Pinelands, and others. But for the most part, sir, there is a gap, and you know what they say, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. And if there is a space, sir, something will either rise or fall to fill the space. And if we do not control what falls into that space, sir, it would not be surprising to me that a lot of our society now is completely out of order. Because there has been a gap, sir, and I want to tie this to these neoliberal policies that governments pursue. This idea that it is all about the GDP, and that to me the P that matters most should always be people. So we will always have this. We got to get back to the point, sir. I'm not saying we're going back to the days where the state does everything, but we have to get to the point, sir, where we realize that people are the center of development. That is what we should be measuring. How many of our people have we been able to take out of poverty? How many of our people have become nice, decent citizens? How many people respect their mother? Well, those are the things we should be measuring at the end of the day, as well as measuring our formal GDP. Sir, and this is not new for me. When I was again in the government with a few others, we wrote a paper, sir, on which we were arguing about the government's capacity to build social capital. Can a government build social capital? I mean, back in the day, sir, you didn't have to go and create an NGO, you didn't have to go and build a community group. Well, they were there. They kind of evolved, you know what I mean, Honorable Member for St. Michael East. When I grew up in the Plains, there were so many, they just kind of evolved out of these circumstances, that these circumstances gave birth to them almost out of necessity. It is absolutely, the Honorable Member for St. Michael East is reminding me like the landship and so on, but sir, these things emerged almost from the soil of the social circumstances. And now you can hardly find a community group emerging from the bottom up. Hardly. I was canvassing in my constituency, sir. It's very difficult to do it these days, but you know what? We got to get back and do it. Because we could be the best ministers, but unless we find some time to get back up on the ground, you know, people say, yeah, I see you. The time they didn't see me. So I got to make sure I get back up on the ground. But I canvassed on Saturday, sir. And while I was canvassing, a young man said to me he wants to do a basketball competition. He could come together and we could do a competition real quick and knock it off for May Day. I said, I would like to help you with a competition, but I want to build a basketball team or teams. Because then they could, you know, bring people off the street and actually have them doing something for a period of time, not a one-off entertainment event. A lot of this NGO work now has become entertainment events. And we need transformative events, sir. And I look at the work of the Trust, sir, the Maria Holder Trust, and their commitment to children is mind-blowing. In St. Michael Southeast, that the Honorable Member represents, who's still on Ballard, and every time I mention her, I wish her the best in God's hands on her, sir. But the community center that the Maria Holder Trust renovated, it's first class. They did an excellent job, sir, right there on that hill, and allowing people now to be able to use the facility. But you know, a building, sir, is just a building. You could have the most beautiful building in the world, and it is just the most beautiful building in the world. But if you create a building or a community center or as a community center, but we still having difficulty accessing the community center, accessing the building, sir. Well, we only begin to barely scrape the surface. We have to make our facilities open to people on a larger scale, sir, so that the true realization of what the Maria Holder Trust intends to do manifests itself in the lives of people, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I said, sir, I was concerned about can a government be involved in building social capital. And I believe we can, sir. But I believe it has to be different. And that we have to be the facilitators, sir, not necessarily the drivers of everything, but we have to be the facilitators. We have to understand a new role for government, sir. A role for government that is deep in partnership with the private sector. I mean real, proper, healthy, strategic partnership that is funded in the principles of good governance. Not the kind of partnership that get involved in here in the last 10 years, sir, that occurred in the hours of darkness, sir, that you cannot find the records for, sir, not that kind of partnership. I mean real, proper, strategic, God-fearing partnership, Mr. Speaker, sir. And that we build out our societies and our communities with work through the NGO sector. The Honourable Member for St. Peter has responsibility for the third sector. And in my mind, that is one of the most important sectors, sir, that has to be developed. It has to be one of the most important sectors, sir, because there is a gap between what the state now does, sir, and the accepted private sector, sir. There is such a big space. We need advocacy. And that as a government, we cannot be afraid to empower these civil society organizations to turn around and challenge the very same government, because that is the principle of good governance, Mr. Speaker, sir. That is the principle on which we must stand. And I wish to say, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is a cost, you know. There is a cost for not doing this, sir, and there is a cost for not doing it now. When I a few years ago, I wouldn't say where it was, a few years ago, Mr. Speaker, sir, when the other government was in power, I heard one of the then members of that government, he said, sir, in a conversation, that he wants to build buildings so that when he leaves politics, he'll remember for the buildings he built. He want to build buildings. And I mean, the question he was almost asking philosophically is like, what politician here to do? A politician here to build buildings? Oh, no. You are here, sir, to serve the people. And if you build buildings, sir, the buildings have to serve the people, not to be, for your name to be on it when you leave politics. Sir, I just feel like there is so much work for us to do, sir, in transforming this country that we live in. There is so much to do. And as we continue, sir, to be driven by neoliberal agendas and policies and a world order that prefers a neoliberal approach to things, that gap is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Because what the world continues to measure are the things like how much access you allow people to trade and the cost of your goods and how long does it take you to get the ship in and out the port. And all those things are very important, sir. All those things are important. But at the end of the day, for what purpose? What purpose? It has to be about helping people, and at its core. And that is why, sir, I would find it very difficult to do anything but support this resolution wholeheartedly, because at the core of the Maria Holder Trust and all that they have done in Barbados, sir, it is to help people. It is to help people, and they've helped, sir, in the community where I grew up, and, you know, like all of us, it would be nice if they would help in our constituencies, but they can't do all. But, you know, they can help St. Michael's South, but they can't do all. They can help the city. But, sir, the point I am making, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that if we work with our corporate sector, our private sector, sir, all of us at some point or the other, or in some way or the other, have businesses in our communities, sir, who have a responsibility to give back. And that we should be, we are thankful for the help from the trust, but I feel the business sector can give back to the very communities that they are located in, or that the people come from, or that they do most of their business in, sir. The individuals also have to give back, and that we have to build up the NGO sector to also be able to give back. And if we were to do all of these things, Mr. Speaker, sir, what a lovely place this would be. If we were to be able to do all those things, what a lovely place this would be. And, you know, I don't have any axe to grind with anybody. I don't pick fights nor nothing. But I also feel, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we cannot let people come and bully us either. I feel, Mr. Speaker, sir, that Barbados has to know what Barbados is about. If ever I've been proud, Mr. Speaker, sir, it was when, in the beginning of this whole IMF conversation, when the IMF expected us to cower, the Honorable Prime Minister said, before we start this conversation, these are the things we got to do. Before I send my people on a long march, let me give my people breakfast. And a whole slew of social policy provisioning. Straight up at the beginning of the conversation, sir, that is governance. And she did it, sir, in a neoliberal time, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I feel being a good corporate citizen, I understand, may be difficult because people want to measure their bottom line. But tell me what your bottom line does for you if you got your nice business place in a place full of crime. Tell me what your bottom line will do for you if the entire community around you is falling apart, overgrown with bush, old stuff, garbage, windows falling out. Tell me. Nobody ain't gonna want to do business with you either. So that is a very myopic, short-sighted approach to development, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I want to close as I began, sir, by saying that I think the Maria Holder Trust is the embodiment, Mr. Speaker, sir, in many ways, in the way they've applied themselves in Barbados, of what good philanthropy should be, Mr. Speaker, sir. But I also want to close as I began as well, Mr. Speaker, sir, by recognizing how difficult it is when a country finds itself having to grapple with neoliberal policies driving the way they interact with the world, how difficult it is, sir, to be able to get all the things you want to do done. And as I close, Mr. Speaker, sir, you know, I look at what we've done in the last 10 months, 11 months now. And I say to myself, we have been able to do such wonderful work, even though we inherited a government at a time that basically had our hands tied. And that people are talking about the Barbados Labour Party government going to the IMF. You know, the truth is the Democratic Labour Party government took us there with our hands tied, mouth gagged, dragged to the door. Hands out begging, basically. And that we engaged in the process with some dignity, sir. A process that we did not wish for ourselves, sir, but that we engaged with dignity because of the leadership of the country. And people must not forget it. And that we now have to depend more and more on these organizations to come and help us out because we don't have the financial space to do it. I look forward to the time when we have a little more financial space to do more things. But I also want to close, sir, by thanking from the bottom of my heart the Maria Holder Trust for the work they have done. I want to encourage other large-scale organizations involved in philanthropy, sir, in much the same way as the Maria Holder Trust for their work. I also want to encourage the NGO sector to get involved and to help us, sir, rebuild this country. Mr. Speaker, so I always tell my constituents when they want to do a tournament or whatever, when they want to do something, if you bring it to me, we can shape it out together. But you know, I don't want to come and be doing all these things because it's not sustainable. Form yourself into a little organization, form a group, and then let us work with the group, you know? and that we got to shift this whole mindset, sir, but it's going to be a national thing. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to thank you. I spoke longer than I had intended to, but I want to thank you, sir, for the time that you gave me. I wish, sir, to say to you and to your constituents through you as well, Mr. Speaker, sir, that all of us are working very, very hard to improve their lives, and that we are. All of us are working very, very hard, sir, to improve their lives. But there's only, the Maria Holder Trust is only one organization. You know what I mean? They're not going to be able to do, Mr. Speaker, sir, work in every constituency at the same time. You got to get the business people in St. Michael's Central to come and lend a hand, Mr. Speaker, sir. The business people in St. Michael's South, and you know, St. Michael's South has a nice gap called Aquatic Gap, Bear Hotels. You got to get them to come and lend a hand. The honorable member for St. Peter has, well, you know, he's on the coast. There are many people there who could willingly lend him a hand as well. But all of us, sir, because it's not about me or you, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is about the people, and I want to thank the Maria Holder Trust for being able to help the people. I thank you, sir, for your time.
Honourable member for St. John.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the members who contributed to this debate and thank them for the level of passion that they shared as it relates to the Maria Holder Trust. I hope that maybe at some point in time in the future, all of us can maybe birth organizations that the honourable member for St. Peter mentioned and the honourable member for St. Michael South as it relates to community-based and NGO organizations, because I really believe that that is the way that we should go in terms of helping our constituents, because it is impossible for government to do all of it alone. So again, I want to sincerely thank them for contributing to this particular debate, and I now beg that this resolution be passed.
Question is that the aforementioned resolution be passed. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed. Honourable member for the City of Bristol.
Mr. Speaker, that brings us to the end of government business for the day. I beg to move that the sitting be suspended until 10 a.m. Adjourn until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 7th of May.
Question that this House be adjourned until the 7th day of May 2019 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands adjourned until the 7th day of May at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.